Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year, we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. Since the March 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country, the Reagan Foundation is now bringing its events online to ensure that we are still delivering world-class content, even if you can't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you a conversation with best-selling author James Patterson and United States Army First Sergeant retired Matt Eversmann for a discussion on their new book, Walk in My Combat Boots. James Patterson is one of the world's best-selling authors, as well as one of its most trusted storytellers. His writing career is characterized by a single mission: to prove that there is no such thing as a person who doesn't like to read, only people who haven't found the right book. He's donated over 3 million books to school children and to the military, as well as endowed over 5,000 college scholarships for teachers. His co-author for Walk in My Combat Boots is Matt Eversmann, an Army sergeant whose inspiring story of survival during a 1993 hostile conflict in Mogadishu became immortalized forever in the epic film Black Hawk Down. Although most of James Patterson's books are in the thriller genre, Walk in My Combat Boots is a powerful collection crafted from hundreds of original interviews with the remarkable young men and women who serve in our military. In a January 2021 Facebook post, James Patterson called the book the most important book of his career, saying that the book will change the way you view our military. It is the stories your friends and family who serve can't tell you themselves. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program, coming to you from our Air Force One Pavilion Leadership Academy Oval Office, with James Patterson, Matt Eversmann, and Reagan Foundation and Executive Director John Hybush.
Jim Patterson, Matt Eversmann, what a pleasure it is to be with you to talk about, well, I think you said it, Jim, perhaps the most important book that you've ever written, and that is really, really saying something, is it not?
Yeah, maybe the only important book I've ever written, but that's okay.
Tell me, well, why would you say something like that?
Because it's so hugely important to get people to understand the military, and people don't. When Matt and I get together, and he can tell you sort of how we got together. But we had a two-pointed mission. The first was, if you've been in the military or if you've been in combat, you will say Sergeant Eversmann and Patterson got it right, and they gave us a voice, especially the people on the ground. Secondly, if you don't really understand what the military is all about, even if you think you do, you'll read this book, and this has happened hundreds of times already, thousands of times actually. You will say, for the first time in my life, I understand what it means to serve, and I understand what it means. And this is a hard concept to really get in your head and your heart, but I understand what it means to put my life on the line for somebody else. And the next time you say, thank you for the service, thank you for your service, you'll understand what you're thanking these people for. So that was our mission, a dual mission.
Yeah, it seemed to me, Jim, that point you just made about, because how many times people go through an airport, see someone in the military, what have you, and they use the line, thanks for your service, but it often seems like maybe they don't have a clue what they're really thanking them for, right?
Yeah, not that it's a bad thing, but yeah, it's a whole lot better if they really get it. And look, we're going to send a book to everybody in Congress. Mm-hmm. I'm not criticizing, I don't go right, left, or whatever, but they need to understand the military. And an awful lot of people there do not understand what it's all about. They don't understand what service means. They don't understand the sacrifices. They don't understand the responsibility that we have to take when we bring these men and women back. We have a responsibility to make sure that we that we put them back in the same shape that they were in when they went over, or certainly come closer to that. We need to take responsibility, and we're not doing that, in my opinion, and Matt's opinion too, I think. I don't want to speak for Matt.
Yeah, well, what a tough responsibility that is, to put them back in the same shape as when they left. And as you read your book, you determine, boy, that's not easy. Matt, do you want to get in on this?
Yeah, listen, there's so many add-ons to that mission that Jim and I had talked about and that Jim had just described. And, not the least of which, too, is that, here we are in the, coming up on spring, hopefully soon, of 2021. We've been at war for 20 years. My daughter is going to be a college freshman and has never seen peacetime. And yet a lot of folks, and they're well-meaning and well-intended folks, in this country have never been touched. We're not touched by 9/11. They don't know any veterans. They have no family in the military. They've never met anyone. So this is really, I think, also a very good way to introduce these great sons and daughters to our country. Maybe reintroduce them, but remind them, which again, like Jim said, so when you're at the airport or you're at the grocery store, wherever it is, and you see this young man or woman, you got a little bit of, I think, deeper appreciation for their sacrifice and their service.
But it's amazing. Matt has been talking to people at West Point, and they're going to make the students there. They're going to have them read this book, because they believe it prepares these people when they go out, and they're going to have people under them so that they understand what these people are all about, which to me is a great compliment to the men and women that talk to us in the book.
Yeah, sure. Can you talk for a minute about the process of writing this book? As I went through, you go through the first few pages and you say, oh boy, all this is in first person. And people are talking about their story, I this, I that. Did you ask people to sit down and write an essay, or did this come from interviews?
Matt will get very heavily into it, but the quick answer is that Matt did interview. The reason, Matt, why don't you start with the bar and how we met, and everybody meets in a bar, right? But we'll get to the bar.
No, this is important really for the whole story here, because I was invited by a mutual friend of ours. I did not know Jim at the time, but our friend Tim invited me to go to Afghanistan with him to do a documentary about battlefield medicine. And when it looked like this was going to happen, Tim said, I think you should sit down with Jim Patterson and talk a little bit about interviewing people, which of course, when you're presented with that opportunity, it takes about a nanosecond to say yes. And so it truly was at a bar that Jim, Tim, and I sat down and started talking about, the art of interviewing, the art of storytelling. And, I have about like this much experience in doing it. But what Jim told me that I recall the most poignant was that every one of us has one story to tell, one really good one. And all you got to do is just, get them to open up and do it, which sounds very simple. And in some ways it is, but that was it. And so my mission that Jim gave me was go out and find some stories. Which,
I looked at the film when they came back, and Matt did some interviews in the film. And I said, this guy is so good at this. Matt was, because, a lot of times you see interviews on television and there's a screen because the person being interviewed doesn't really trust the interviewer that much. But Matt, because he is who he is and because he has the same experience, he knew the right questions to ask and he knew the right follow-up questions to ask. So in terms of the book, we went out and we got hundreds of people, and Matt did almost all the interviews. And then the interviews were 40 or 50 pages long. He would dump them at my house and he'd mark up what he thought were good sections. And then the trick was to turn them into these 5, 6, 7 page chapters. And that is, so I think there's two pieces of magic here. One is the interviews that Matt did where he got these people to open up. And that's not the easiest thing in the world, because my dad was in World War II. He never talked about it. And so many of us have fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, friends who have been over there and just won't talk about what they went through. But Matt got the stories out of the people. And then the next trick was to take those and boil them down. Like Matt says, there's 45 books in this book. Every one of these 4, 5, 6-page chapters is a book. You meet somebody, you know who they are, you get a very quick feeling for them, and you hear a couple of terrific stories. I mean, like there's so many good stories. I don't think there's a bad story in the book. There was a dentist who went over, a reservist, and Saddam Hussein had been captured, and he had tooth problems. They brought this dentist in to be Saddam Hussein's dentist, and among other things, when he spent time with him, Saddam said, I just invented the weapons of mass destruction. I invented that idea because I knew it would drive the Americans crazy, which it did. At any rate, story after story after story.
Yeah, you mentioned your father, Jim, and my father was the same way. Part of that greatest generation, World War II. But this issue of veterans coming back from combat, not wanting to speak of the experience, certainly not offering up the stories. Why is that?
Nat?
Yeah, so I would give you a couple of possibilities. Because I don't know them all seriously, but I think, in one sense, you've got men and women in a culture where, the quiet professional, if you will, the very self-deprecating, it's all part of a greater good and a bigger team. And what I did it as an individual really doesn't matter, which is, very understandable. However, letting them know that in this case, you much like your teammates, but you're the one we're talking to, and I want to hear about you. And kind of once they could gather that, they would understand. So if you break through that bond is one. I think the other thing is that a lot, particularly those that have seen direct action, I think in this case, have witnessed some really horrible things that maybe they just feel it's too graphic, it's just too gory, it's too fill in the blank that I could share in polite society kind of thing. And so again, trying to get them to, hey, listen, you tell that part and we, meaning really Jim, will be able to soften it up. But I think those two are really the first two big stumbling blocks to get a lot of veterans to talk.
Yep. And Matt, as Matt said, a lot of these men and women were so self-effacing and saying, I don't really have a story. And they do have stories. And not only do they have stories, but the way they express themselves is so true and honest and better than fiction. I mean, I just tiny little pieces I'll give you, and you just see how good the description is. This is a Rory Patrick Hamill, and he said, I can hear the birds chirping. The sky is so blue and the sun feels great. It's so weird and perverse having these thoughts because the exact opposite is happening to me. I'm in a helicopter. I wind up flatlining for 2 minutes. I'm not a religious person. I don't experience the great white light, but I do feel absolute peace, like I'm one with the universe. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. So there's 2 paragraphs, man, that just, you want to know what it's like to think that you're just about to die, as opposed to the cliche, my whole life went before my eyes, which it doesn't seem like too many people actually have that experience, but yeah. You hear that all the time. No, that's probably not what happens. And here's another, once again, it's just a short piece, but this book is full of these because these people, they're telling the truth. They're telling their truths. She's an Air Force flight nurse, Jody Pritchard. And she says, I have a full sleeve tattoo dedicated to the patients I've lost over the years. It's a reminder of what I've seen. It's also a reminder for me to remember that it's okay to feel the way I do. In other words, she's got these scars. I wouldn't trade my life for anything in the world. I love wearing the uniform. And, and you start to read these things and you're getting it. Maybe for the first time in your life, you're understanding what it means to serve. And why the big emotion. And over and over and over again, you hear these soldiers talk about the love the love they feel for one another. It's crucial. And you watch Lone Survivor, the movie, you never hear the word love. I shouldn't say you never, but I mean, and that's more than anything, I think that's what it's about. That's what drives these people to be to help one another, to put their lives on the line. It's that love for one another and in a lot of cases, love for the country.
Yeah, this expression of love, we're certainly not talking about it in a romantic sense, but rather it's a love that's so powerful. It's you're willing to give your life up to your fellow man, fellow sister, right? I think you put your finger right on it, Jim. Well,
they put their fingers on it, man. That's the beauty of these people, the men and women in this book.
Sure. Now, as I recall, you capture the stories of veterans, men and women. It goes back, I remember the stories starting from those who served in Operation Desert Storm, and ever since then, Afghanistan, Iraq, and the rest. But many of your stories I saw, these are men and women who 9/11 affected so much so that they said, I'm in, sign me up. Is there anything that distinguishes in your mind are those who got into action as a result of 9/11? Is there something unique about them and their service and that gave them a powerful reason to serve, but they're just like any other combat veteran?
Jim, could I just jump in?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
At the beginning, I give you a forked tongue answer because I think it's a little bit of both. I think that there is always going to be this core group of young men and women that will continually enlist. I mean, this is a great option, the military, for all the obvious reasons: college, money, get out of town, get out of the house, whatever. I mean, reason I went in, get my head screwed on straight. But then there's this post 9/11, or which we by design had used as kind of the center point of kind of where were you in relation to 9/11 in this world. Some were finishing, some were starting, but I think that really shows this. When we talk about the last generation, whatever that last generation is, that they're weak, or they're entitled, or they're all this stuff. I'm like, well, I think that was my generation 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever. I don't want to show, I guess 40 years ago, but you listen to these stories of these guys and these men and women. This is a great generation. These are really good men and women that are just maybe not better, not worse, but they were called to do this. They felt the calling and they did it. So I think there's, if I don't hope I'm not waffling over that answer, but I think that they're to be commended because listen, we have men and women today that enlisted after 9/11. They weren't alive at 9/11 and they're serving today, which, you let that sink in for a minute.
It's an interesting, right now we're all going through this tricky time, obviously. And here's the book, but when I get books all the time, people want blurbs from me, editors and whatever. And so the publisher sent the book out, and you never know what's going to happen. But the blurbs were so incredible in terms of they were so heartfelt. You could tell that people really thought about them a lot. And Admiral McRaven, who's a very good author on his own, and Make Your Bed, and just really, really good. But he said something that it really rings so loudly right at this moment. And he said, if these challenging times cause you to lose hope, this book will reaffirm your faith in all that is good and honorable about this country, which is just, that's such a wonderful thing. There's so many negative things floating around in the air right now, unfortunately, whether you're left, right, or center. And this is a very positive book. This is really, doesn't sugarcoat things, but it's positive. We had Stanley McChrystal, General McChrystal, he quoted, and he said, stories is painfully raw and probably funny. There is a lot of humor in here too, and completely human as the soldiers themselves. And, I know President Clinton, no offense, I'm close to the Bushes too. So, I go all ways. But and the president and I, Clinton and I, wrote a novel together, so we're friendly. And I didn't want to quote from him, but I sent it to him. And he's a Southerner, so he's very familiar with the military. And when he was president, he went to more bases than anybody since FDR. And he said for 3 days after he read this book, he could think of nothing else. And he said the book will take your breath away, break your heart, and leave you in awe. And he wasn't trying to sell books for us. He really meant this. He said, every American should read it, which is why, we're sending books to everybody in the Congress. You're going to make decisions about the military, man. Understand, man and woman, understand what you're making decisions about. You got to understand it. You're going to make decisions about the veterans hospitals. Understand these people. Understand what they're going through. You live with them. Feel for them. Think of them. It's a funny thing now with with what happened in Congress, in the sense of, and I don't mean political here, but I have not heard any Congress people say, let's defund the Capitol Police. Not to get political, but I mean, if you feel this stuff, if it goes home, it changes how you act. And the better we understand the military, the more appropriate our actions toward the military will be, in my opinion.
Yeah, well said. There was it seemed to me in reading all the stories, there's a particularly unique characteristic that seems to, it's a commonality that all men and women that have been in combat seem to display, and that is when they are separated from their unit, whether because of an injury or any reason or another, the one thing they seem to want more than anything else, they have to get back to their unit. There's almost a sense of guilt, as it were, if they're not with their unit. Explain that. Why is that?
Matt?
Well, it is a...
I feel that way when I'm away from Matt, but...
It's not the same through the thing, Jim. I give you a hug, but I can't. But, I'm so happy that you saw that and that jumped out, because that's woven in the fabric. That's part of the DNA of the military. And this idea of selflessness and duty and integrity and loyalty and all that stuff, but all of it put together, these values support these young men and women to say yes to this national mission. And that's greater than most of us will ever be called to do. And even the ones that are, the most grisly, angry, kind of mopey and groaning and moaning people, when you get all the fluff away, though, it's that love of their teammate on their left and right. And it doesn't matter, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, and male, female, none of that matters. It's all about your teammate. It's all about your mates. It's all about it just is. And so you separate from that, from the crucible experience. My gosh, they're lost. And they're like, I'm not shouldering my share of the task here. Now somebody's got to do my job. And you see it in the book when the guy talks about, literally his hand is severed, and he's asking the medic, through his pain, I how soon can I go back? You can't make it up. I'm telling you can't make it up. It's not hyperbole. It's not bravado. It's pure, earnest love of their teammates and support of that mission. That's the best I can explain it.
And one of the things you'll see over and over and over again in the book, and you'll remember them. I mean, you just said you read it. I'm sure you remember that scene. You remember these things because they're so, you're there, and it's so truthful and honest. And you'll remember that medic. You'll remember there's a woman here, a nurse, and what she had to do, the scene that we have with her is, she had to fly back from Germany to the United States with several soldiers who were going to die, but they were bringing them home so that they would die with their families. And you're on the plane with her. You will, and I've written a lot of detective fiction, Alice Cross and whatever, and I never get it really right. But you will read this and you will feel what it is like to be shot at for the first time. You will feel that. You will feel and understand better what it's like to have to shoot at somebody for the first time. It's really amazing in terms of just scene after scene where you're right there. When I write the fiction, at a certain point, I will write it at the top of the chapter, be there, meaning that if I don't feel it, I don't think the reader will feel it. And this book is just full of that. I'm there. I am there. I am in that helicopter. Matt has a favorite story about a door gunner. Do you want to tell them what a door gunner is for starters?
It is. So,
they hang over the door with the machine gun. Yeah.
They really do. Every helicopter, has a pilot, a co-pilot, and then 2 crew chiefs. And each of those crew chiefs is responsible for not only the maintenance of the helicopter, but also the security. And the security is the gun. So ergo door gunner. It's as dangerous as it sounds. It's as difficult as it sounds. And it is not normally, and has not been to date, a really great opportunity for female Marines to do. And yet another 9/11 young female who found her calling went to the recruiter and says, I want to be in Force Recon. And they said, well, you can't be because it's only male. And she's like, well, what else is hard? They're like, you could be a door gunner. She's like, sign me up. And the caveat was she would have to graduate top of her class at every single school. And I think there were like 6 or 7 of them, from basic training all the way through, just to get the opportunity to be on a plane to go to combat. And I mean, the rest of Lisa's story is amazing. Lisa Bodenberg is her name, but you read in 5 or 6 pages, the highs and the lows of this young, 21-year-old who is more put together than most, adults I know. And she just, one foot in front of the other, as Jim says, just keep chopping wood, man, just keep chopping wood. She does. My daughter is going to be a college athlete next year. And I tell her, when you hit the wall, when you are in the trough, when you're down, you read Lisa's story. That'll get you through.
Yeah, it got me through. And she was first in her class and she ended up as a door gunner. What a story. It was really riveting. So one of my favorites too. Let's talk, Jim, you made the point that you've sent one of these to every member of Congress. And I think in my mind, one of the reasons it was so important to do that is because so much of this is about mental health. And what I mean by that, and I know the both of you know this, is sure when many of our soldiers have paid the ultimate price, and those that have come back with terrible injuries that you can see as, boy, do we owe them a debt. But it seems to me, if you've been in combat, you come back with an invisible injury of one form or another, every single one of our vets. And those are injuries that are not visible to the naked eye, yet they're pervasive in the military, and they need to be treated. They need to be handled in this day and age. Would you agree?
Matt?
100%, without a doubt. It is very real. Great terminology, the invisible wounds, whether they're diagnosed or just maybe kind of vaguely understood. It is true. And I just throw this out, because we touch on it. I say a lot of these soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marine, would talk about it very frankly. And it occurred to me, literally today, thinking about this interview, and I think it's important to know too, not one of these interviewees, wants a pity party. Not one of them was ever, woe is me. They didn't talk about it like we're talking about having a cup of coffee. Like, yeah, though when I'm working on my traumatic brain injury and my PTSD, or this, how they muscle through. And I say that to highlight, it's very real. It needs to be addressed. I hope as people read this, it'll be addressed. But I also hope that people read this and realize, like, they're not lepers. We don't gotta. They're not monkeys in a cage that we can, like, oh my gosh, there's that person. It is it's a phenomena that they're dealing with, and I hope we are showing that
Somebody described reading the book. They said it was like going to a military outpost. This wouldn't happen, and every 10 minutes you'd have somebody else come in and tell you their story. A Marine, a sailor, or whatever. And over the course of 5 or 6 hours, you would hear, these 30 or 40 stories, and you would walk away going, that was one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had. And that's kind of the way a lot of people respond to this book. We were with the Amazon people yesterday, and their head book person, who, as he said, I can't tell you how many books I have to read a year. He said that this was the best book he had read in over a year. And that's extraordinary when you think about, the books that come through a place like Amazon. And it just affects people. And I think it affects people because there's no experience like this. One after the other, it's like you're meeting these people.
And if I could just add on to Jim's comment too, from a veteran perspective who has enjoyed and grew up reading military books, there are some phenomenal battles, incredible battles that are so difficult to read about, not because of the content, it's just, they're so confusing. It's filled with jargon, it's filled with terminology, and you kind of have to tell the story with all this military terms, and even soldiers sort of scratch their head and say, wow, that was time I'll never get back trying to read this. This is a book that's easy to read. You can pick it up anywhere and, thumb a page or two, and all of a sudden you're starting a new chapter, and it will just, it'll keep you going for, 6, 8, 9 pages. And I just marvel at how really Jim was able to condense these 50-page documents down to 6 pages and just grab it, hold you, and you don't have to.
I don't know any of the terminology, so most of it I threw out. It's funny. We were interviewed a couple of days ago, one of the bookstore events, and it was a military guy, and there was one sentence, and he had like 8 acronyms in the one sentence. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it, and I didn't know what any of them meant, but there were like 8 of them in one sentence, and that's unfortunately what some of these books read like for civilians.
Sure. Well, and some of those acronyms are tied to this mental health issue, just the TBI, the PTSD. I found it fascinating that in this issue of having to deal with mental health problems as a result of combat, some of your soldiers in this book came to the revelation that the way they best dealt with these emotions themselves was to help others deal with their PTSD, with their problems, right? That seemed to be a thread that came through some of the stories as well.
It is. And again, those that aren't in this book would argue, would say the same thing. You see it. The one that comes to mind is Mike Ergo, who you might recall was the redheaded Marine who joined the band and then wound up after basic training, decided to go into the infantry. And the story though about is just that, Mike decided after, and he himself, he hit the bottom. He hit rock bottom and found, because of another veteran, a way out to get back on top, and through fitness, and then fitness helping others. And so that theme, it happens all around us all the time. And it's really, I think it's a function of that national mission. It's a culture of giving back, that selflessness. But you see that here a lot. And everybody will always say, hey man, if you're in trouble, call me. Don't hesitate, call me. I'll always, here's my phone. And people put it out on the internet. I mean, you think about, my gosh, a zillion people, but they're putting it out, from their heart, because I want you to call me if you're feeling bad. No greater love.
One of the things that Matt's been through it. I don't know if we mentioned, but Matt was the actual sergeant portrayed in the movie Black Hawk Down. So he's been there. And that was one of the reasons that I think a lot of these people would talk to him, just because he's been there. He's the real deal. Me, not so much. But one of the things that I understood is just the sense of purpose that these people have in the military. They come back home And what we've heard again and again and again is if you can do it, the important thing is you have to get another mission. You have to get another thing to give you a sense of purpose. And there's a lot. It could be your kids. There's a lot of things it could be, but if you don't get another mission, it's going to be difficult, or it could be difficult.
Yeah, and I think that's why we see so many veterans joining or forming these organizations back home to go provide disaster relief. You name it. That's their next mission. You're absolutely right, Jim. Another thing that struck me about this book and the stories is maybe the second or third story you get to, there's a story of a woman. You mentioned the door gunner. But I thought, okay, they've got a story of a brave woman in there. Is this a token ad or no? There are a lot of women here. So then you go chapter after chapter after chapter. I think I'm wondering if you were trying to make a point here that guess what? There is a lot of women that are in combat or combat support roles, and they are given just as bit as every man out there.
I think in all honesty, when we started this thing and Jim gave me a really wide parameters, to go out and find these soldiers and, sailors and airmen and Marine. And I think very naturally, just to kick it off was, hey, Matt, make sure you don't just call up all your old Ranger buddies and your 10th Mountain buddies. So make sure you spread the wealth. And also make sure that specifically you don't just leave it with, ground pounder infantry guys, which means you have to get females. I mean, that's really sort of the only two ways you can go here. And so I must admit, I was aware, just because, listen, lots of women, and I could tell a million war stories from my own experience. But, the female truck driver that delivers the mail, we kind of forget about her. But she spent, 14 months with 150,000 kilometers of driving time. Oh, by the way, blown up, stopped counting after a dozen because she was blown up, every, once a month. And yet she's still out there doing it. Like this young female faced the enemy far more than I did in my time in Iraq. And you're like, she's got a story to tell. So I thought that was important that we did. And, I don't know that there was an agenda. I would let Jim, answer.
No, I think we wanted it to be representative, period. And there are a lot of women involved in a lot of ways. Some in combat now, and that's changing. The door gunner, some of the brass.
Helicopter pilots.
A lot of nurses. Yeah, helicopter pilots, right. I mean, there's that one wonderful story about the pilot coming in and once again, you get that feeling of you got like 90 seconds or 2 minutes. Get in, get those couple of wounded people, get the hell out without getting blown up. That's stunning stuff.
Yeah. Another thing that I think you really put the magnifier on is for every story there is in combat, there is another story back home. There is the sacrifice, the chaos, the difficulties faced by spouses being separated. Every father or mother becomes a single parent for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. Serving in our military requires not just sacrifice abroad, but at home as well, right?
Yeah, and I think that's one of Matt's missions now, right?
Yeah, it's a tremendous sacrifice, and if you're a naysayer, say, oh well, they volunteered. That is true. There's no doubt we all did volunteer. However, improbable to think that we could volunteer to be at war for 20 years. And, you think there are young men and women from West Palm Beach that enlisted that have spent more time during their post 9/11 career in Baghdad and Kandahar than they have, on Clematis Street in here in West Palm Beach. And, they know their teammates better than they know their children. It's just the way it is. And that's Bank of America doesn't ask that from you. No offense to Bank of America, but you get the point.
Yeah, sure, sure. And then another interesting dynamic, I saw it in several stories, whether it's a male or female, they're in a combat situation, they all seem to believe that when they call home, when they talk to back home, that they can BS their family, that they can, look, everything's just fine, don't worry about it. And meanwhile, all hell is breaking loose. But I think there's this, I need to protect my family back home by not letting them know how I feel or how things are going or what's happening as well.
I would agree with that. I would agree. From my own experience, when we first got to Iraq in our little patrol base, which, was southwest of Baghdad. The long story, we had one satellite phone, one Iridium phone. And if you stood in the middle of the helicopter landing zone, at midnight on one foot and, pulled your arm out, you could get through the three operators to speak home. And, it wouldn't be a fib to say, when I spoke to my wife, how's it going? Oh, everything's great. Even though literally we had just had a mortar attack, and you're like, I hope this ends so I can call my wife because I told her I was gonna call. And you're like, how's everything going, honey? It's great. Everything's fine. It's a piece of cake. Don't worry about it. And literally they like that happened. That would happen all through the country. And that's sort of a silly example, but it does happen. And there is that. You want to be overprotective. You don't want to brag. You don't want to sound cavalier. But at the end, I think it's those families that really do need to hear, what their spouse went through or their child went through.
Yeah, sure. Well, I spent part of my career in the Red Cross, and as you all know, they've had the mission for many, many years to be right alongside our soldiers. And it used to be a world where the only way a soldier could get word back home or would be through a messenger service at the Red Cross. Now you can, like you say, you can pick up a satellite phone and you're right in the middle of the chaos that's happening on Main Street, right? And it's sometimes, I think there was a quote about the book or in the book about how in the modern day our soldiers are tied to the dysfunction back home. It's an interesting element of fighting in today's world. One thing that struck me was I think a few of your stories involve not just the husband or wife that's in combat, but there's many situations in the military where the husband and wife are in the service of the military at the same time. That seems to be a move from the standpoint of trying to keep a family together. It's not just a geometric progression in terms of how difficult it is to keep a family unit together, but it's like an exponential problem, right? Because to have two serving in the military at once is really, it tears at so many things, right?
Yeah, listen, one of Jim's favorite stories are the Droughty Twins. If you recall that story,
Well, once again, we talked about, pretty much every story here could be a book. And with the Droughtys, they go over there, they're Rangers, and they're both in pretty dangerous missions that they're doing on a regular basis. And but they're in separate units. And one of them would go out and have a terrible night and get shot at and maybe capture a high profile. And they would immediately be going, I hope my twin is okay. You know what I mean? Which is that thing we know about twins. And you think about that, it's a movie. And it's a particularly nice story in that, they came back home and have a very successful business now together. So they're reunited at home, which is, so they have their original mission, which is to be twins.
Yeah, sure. I remember in that story, Jim, I think one of the twins was, his job was going house to house, kicking down doors, and he was wondering, as he's doing that, what's my brother doing at this particular moment, right? Really something. In terms of difficulties that all soldiers face when they get back home, I made a list of what I seemed to come out of each story to me, and it's, why did I survive when others didn't? Missing the close bonds they formed with those in their unit. There's too much of a sense of order. There's much more of a sense of order in the military and in their lives than the randomness of life back home. An inability to relax and enjoy and experience emotion, being wound too tight, missing the adrenaline rush and the thrill of what they went through. Have I missed anything?
Probably, but it's a pretty good list. Matt?
I would just add on, I think, there's this true sense of purpose with regard to this national mission. This idea, good versus evil, we're going to go, right or wrong, stop the bad guys in whatever direction, our country asks us to go, regardless of who's in charge. That's what we do. It's like that. It's that level that I think it's sort of the innermost ring, but maybe the top of the umbrella, if you're using that analogy of, that's a purpose that you can get behind from broad to narrow and say, yeah, I'm going to go fight bad guys. I'm going to go capture enemy. I'm going to go do this. And then when you get out, for all of those reasons that you mentioned, you're like, I don't know if working for the fill in the blank company doing fill in the blank is going to be quite as I can get passionate about it. I don't think I can.
But there's a lesson for the fill in the blank company too, because if they could operate, if they could care about their employees more and motivate them more, that they would get more out of them, a lot more out of them. So there's a lesson here. That's another thing that I don't think is thought about enough. There's something in the military approach that would be useful to a lot of businesses.
Yeah, sure.
You have to take responsibility. You have to take responsibility for your actions, for your life. This is
Well, in terms of taking responsibility, in reading the stories, another thread that seems to be common to me is I just wonder if the federal government, our Veterans Administration, all those elements that are supposed to be supportive of the military when you're in, do we do a good enough job once you're out to manage a lot of these problems that seem to hang on for years and years, whether they be mental health, survivor guilt, and the rest of that? Could we do more?
Jim, if I could jump in, I think that the answer is yes. We could always do more. Wherever our band of excellence is, we need to elevate it. The sheer numbers are overwhelming. I mean, when you look at, I couldn't do the math fast enough from let's just call 9/11 till today. 250,000 soldiers get out a year times 20 years. That's an awful lot of people that are, as you said, if you've been downrange, need a little bit of help. I think it's easy to beat up on the VA universally, and I think some people have made it a pastime, and not for the right reason of trying to raise the standards. They just beat up on it because it's easy to beat up because one hospital happens to be poorly managed and run, while another one is absolutely fantastic. And so, there's enough of a disparity amongst them that you can't say that they're not capable of delivering really excellent care, but you can say it's not straight across the board to the highest standard. And I believe that the secretaries really do come in order to advance it. Big bureaucracy, it's hard. But yeah, they should and they could. And, we just hope that, as Jim said, he sent a copy to the new Secretary of the VA. And, I hope that it's well received.
But as Matt said, what makes it very difficult is that for the most part, it's a local problem. There are a lot of good hospitals and there are a lot of bad ones. I actually know some people who were counseling President Trump about the VA, and he was definitely interested in the area. And he said, look, they said to him, if you want to solve the problem, and this was a lot of people that ran hospital systems, et cetera. He said it's relatively simple solution, and it's the only solution. You have to let the vets go wherever they need to go, and if that means you have to shut down a few bad hospitals, shut them down.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they said. And they said
Yeah,
that's
sure.
the only way you can really move this thing forward, in their opinions. And these are people that do this for a living.
Yeah. Have patience with me. I have one more list I want to ask you about, but this deals with why are people volunteering? Why are people serving in the military? And when I read the stories that you put together, certainly there's the very big picture. I think, as you mentioned, Matt, it's all about patriotism. But I also read in a lot of the stories, there's the need to test oneself. There's some who seem to me to be adrenaline junkies. They just love that feeling of being on the edge. And then there are a few of the stories where I want to be part of something. Literally, the quote is, "I wanted to be part of something epic." Have I captured it seems there's many reasons to serve as there are people serving.
My experience, when I was a first sergeant, you and even earlier on, you realize everyone comes in for a different reason or multiple reasons. Some kids feel very, they might not even say it out loud, but they're coming in for the college with the GI Bill. All I got to do is 4 years and I can get that, which, for those that aren't interested in college, it's easy to sort of, the college boy and feel like, that you're not as good a soldier. But what you've realized, of course, is that they are. And whether they came in waving the flag or looking for their college money or getting out of the house or staying out of jail, I mean, you got it A to Z. I mean, I've seen it all. But what I've also seen is that these men and women come in and they are in this melting pot and they start being shaped into this idea of, again, a soldier who is going to support the Constitution, against all enemies, foreign and domestic, support of the national mission. And they might get out and forget all that. But I think there's a moment and it all comes together, at that apex where it's like, yeah, I'm here because I'm a profession at arms. I'm in the profession at arms, and that's what I do.
And there's a simple thing here. I'm going to oversimplify, but it's also directionally something that the country has to get back on, which is in the military, within reason, everybody's rowing in the same direction. That's a simple-minded thing, and it's not happening out here in the world, and it's not good. We can't row in different directions and expect to move forward.
Yeah, sure. A sense of commonality and working together to get things done, right? That's what
or not commonality, but working together to get things.
Yeah.
That's
sure.
I mean, that's the more important thing. We seem to be now, it's like, oh, well, I'm different, so therefore I have to go off, and we all have to go off in different directions, rather than, yes, we are different, we have a lot of differences, but we have to keep moving this thing forward.
Did we lose it?
It doesn't serve anybody well for it to be not for the boat to be going and spinning around.
Sure. Yeah. I think, well, one of you earlier touched on something I wanted to make sure we talked about, and that is another common thread seems to be, boy, to be in combat, to be in the military, you'd better have a sense of humor, right? And so many of these stories where if you can't laugh, you're going to cry. So it's maybe some of it's gallows humor. I don't know, but explain if you saw the same thing in all those that.
I'm going to hand this quickly to Matt, but it's also true in police work. It's the same thing. You have to, or in some jobs, if you can't laugh at stuff, you're going to go crazy. It's just the pain is, you have to, but it really is useful if you can laugh at stuff. To let Matt go ahead. Your experience here is.
Yeah, and again, I clearly no clinician or psychologist here, but I think laughter is just another emotion that we display, and gosh, you see some horrible things or witness some horrible things. It could be very easy to get despondent, to cry uncontrollably because somebody just got killed, somebody got wounded, somebody, just bad things happen. And I think you go through a little bit of a growth period where, okay, the first time something bad happens, you process it and you grieve and go through. And then after that, you just sort of pack that away. And what's left is hey, you either laugh or cry. And so laughter is a good one. And listen, also it's a great way to deal with things. It's a lot easier because you know what? This train never stops.
Mhm.
You know, you go out on a mission, somebody gets hurt, wounded, killed. You don't get a timeout. You got to keep going. And tomorrow, next day.
Yeah, and next time it could be you, right? So, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
agreed. Last two questions, and one for each of you, and it's a chance to promote your product. But Matt, I know in your case, Jim had mentioned the film project that I guess you wrapped up a couple of years ago, called "Send Me." And tell us about that, because I know what it's about, but I'd love for our viewers to hear what you've done on that end.
Well, thank you. We really proud that Tim Malloy and I were able to put together this documentary called "Send Me," which highlights the great advances that our country, specifically our military, has made in battlefield medicine. And we used 1993, my experience in Mogadishu as the baseline, and got to go over to Afghanistan and spend time at the forward bases and the field hospitals and the surgical units and really watch and see what we're doing today and how that has really positively affected the survivability of the battlefield. And it is incredible. I mean, there are gobs of stories of these what our medics and surgeons and everybody have done to focus on saving lives on the battlefield, and it's really quite exceptional. It was one of the neatest experiences I've ever had, though I'm by no means a documentarian. It was fun to play one for a little bit.
Yeah, I've not seen it yet, but it just seemed like it did be an incredible piece of work. So I'm looking forward to viewing it.
I hope
Thanks,
you will.
man.
I hope you will. We won an Emmy for it, and I'm very proud about that.
Jim, you've written hundreds of books. You're the world's leader in writing. There's no doubt about it. One of the things that makes you unique, you're about to publish your second book, co-authored with the former president of the United States, Bill Clinton. This one, The President's Daughter. That has really got to be something to co-author a thriller with the United States president. Could you just how did that work?
I come from a small town. My father grew up in the Newburgh, New York poorhouse. His mother was a charwoman there. They had one room, so that my background is pretty modest. I mean, I'm not like wearing that on my sleeve, but it's a long way from there to spending time with President Bush, both of them, spending time with President Clinton, and I've spent a lot of time with them, and we've become friendly. He sent me for Christmas. He sent me Monopoly for Socialists, which is pretty funny, So we did the one, and the thing about the two thrillers that we've done, the second one being The President's Daughter, which is coming out this summer, is the pages really go, but it's authentic. If that happened with the Secret Service, this is how it would happen. In the case of The President's Daughter, it is the ultimate nightmare of any father, but of any, which is his daughter gets kidnapped. And if that happened, it's not like a TV movie where you just kind of go, here's how it would happen. Here's what the possibilities are. Here's how the president might react. Here's what would happen, whatever. And so it's very real. So that's, for me, it becomes a very special book. And the experience was terrific. And, we're friendly. It's a nice relationship.
And it's kind of nice to have the world's leading authority on what would actually happen.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, terrific. I look forward. I think that book's coming out in June, if I remember. So I look forward to that too. Jim, Matt, we cannot thank you enough. Thank you
really
so much.
Good. And really not moderating is not the easiest thing in the world. You did it. You did it well.
Well, it's easy to do when the book is this good. So what a contribution. Thanks to both of you.
I will
And best of luck.
promise everybody who's watching that this book, it will be one of those books, at least this has been the experience of almost everybody, you will not forget reading the book.
That's right. I will not. So thank you both for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's virtual programming event. We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.